So today I'm going to go over button versus big blind 3-bet spot. I'm only going to go through the turn. I'm going to go through each street and why we do what we do with a good chunk of our range. Always like to start at the top of the range. Aces, queens, kings, even jacks, tens, nines. Those are pretty significantly strong value hands given the late formation. And you got button opening something like 40 to 45% of all hands. Tens through aces are absolutely gigantic hands. Same with ace queen, ace king, even some of the big suited aces, king queen, etc. That much is pretty obvious. Don't need to dwell on that. Now, one thing that might be surprising is a lot of what you see from the big blind three betting in other positions, or just three betting in general, is you usually see a lot of suited aces, like an early position versus under the gun. You might see 3 and 4 bets from under the gun +1 from hands like ace 9, ace 8, ace 7, and stuff like that. And you don't really see a ton of that. And we see a lot more 3 betting with these offsuit combos. There's a really specific reason for that. The lower tier reason, the less important reason, I suppose, but not an insignificant reason, is because there's no one behind us. We are the last to act. There's no one behind us to worry about. So that is helpful. But the primary reason why these combos in particular are selected, or in this case not selected, is because when the button is going to be opening such a wide range, they're going to have a lot of suited combos. Like, let's look at this right here. Let's just look at this side of the graph. Look at all this stuff. I mean, they're not getting crazy with all the offsuit combos. They don't open ace deuce or ace 3 full time, and if we change the rake structure, they open even less offsuit combos, as you can see. Actually, I'm wrong about that, but that's not a particularly massive point. But you see a lot of suited combinations here, and one of the perks about not 3-betting this and why the range configuration looks the way that it does is when the button has a fuck ton of suited combos, you don't want them to fold out the flush draws that you're going to dominate. Like when you keep all of your suited aces, or a good chunk of them, in the single raise pots, when you make a flush, a non-insignificant percentage of the time, the button's also going to make a lesser flush. And when you make flushes, a really high percentage of the time, it's actually going to get in. And so you're just setting yourself up from the get-go to be able to cooler the relative range that the button has against you, and that sort of intention is built pre-flop. So that's kind of why you have that. Now, when we go to the other side, a lot of these hands are a little bit mergy. Like ace jack off is kind of mergy, where it's like it's going to get called by worst. It's going to get called by worst jack X and stuff like that. But it also doesn't want to have to like fold itself out, so it's kind of tricky. But the lower you get, the more obvious, even though they're all mixed, the more obvious the reasonings behind why these hands 3-bet becomes. And for these, it's because they're gonna fold out better ace X. Like, let's look at ace 5 off. We 3-bet ace 5 off, and let's see what the button calls with. They fold ace 10, ace 9, ace 8, ace 7, ace 6. So ace 5 off gets all of these hands to fold. They get a suited ace to fold. They get ace 6 suited to fold. So that's pretty incredible. And that's why almost all of the offsuit 3-betting occurs below the threshold of what they fold better than. So a lot of poker, I mean most of poker even, is just about equity when called. So you're trying to do you get better to fold, and can you get worse to call? And as you can see, the depths of game theory go very deep with acknowledgement of these principles, and that's what they're trying to convey to us here. That's what this 3-betting range is trying to represent. And you can kind of just go through the whole of it, and you can just kind of play this game. Like, okay, 5-4 suited. 5-4 suited gets ace highs to fold, as we see. It gets some suited king. I mean, it gets so many stronger suited hands that share the same cards with it to fold. Let's say you have 5-4 diamonds in 3-bet. I mean, you get queen deuce of diamonds, king deuce of diamonds, ace deuce of diamonds, all those diamonds to fold. And not even just the flush part. I mean, just the fact that, you have 4 high and you generated a fold in one pre-flop. Um, I mean, that's pretty incredible. And you can see the same thing with the Jack 3 suited, the Jack 4 suited, Jack 7 suited. Like what calls? Like we're Jack 3 suited gets Jack 4 through Jack 8 to fold. Jack 4 gets Jack 5 through Jack 8. We can kind of do this all the way down. But we're going to get called by 10 high, so we're going to get called by hands that are worse than us preflop. So that's kind of what's going on here when you look at these ranges. And you can go all the way down with it. I mean, King 9 off gets Queen high to call, but a better King high is to fold. Like it's probably going to fold King Jack off. I'm pretty sure, right? Yeah, so you can 3-bet Queen or King 9 off, and you get Queen Jack off to fold, but you're going to get like King 6 suited to call. So you're gonna get called by a worse hand and fold out a better one. And that's really this trend is exacerbated in this formation, in this big blind versus button open formation, and players really under 3-bet the big blind, in large part because they don't think about it this way. They think, oh, I get to see a cheap flop or whatever, and they overcall and play this pretty standard spot very poorly. We can go on and on and on through every combo. If you're confused about why something does what it does with respect to what this graph looks like from the big blind here when it's 3-betting, you can just ask yourself those two questions. And if you can't figure it out, you just sit with it. And it should probably come. Like most of this, it makes a lot of sense. But anyways, we're going to go to a flop here. The big blind versus field flop betting strategy is kind of tough because we have a lot of junk here. It might be the most polarized range in all of poker, really. And so on average, you don't get to just go crazy with the betting. Like you got to have a lot of give ups. Your no equity hands, unless you think they're overfolding to minimum defense frequency, aren't really just going to go get after it very often. Even though that's kind of what our inclination is to see bet and then shut down. Like a lot of times you don't really get to do that. I'm not going to get into the whole dynamic of button versus big blind 3-bet pots and do the reports and all of that stuff. I just kind of want to give a brief introduction to that. So here we're going to be betting about half pot, and our sizing here is going to be about half checking and everything else 50 to 75%. As you can see, if we start with our value, it's pretty as expected. Queens, kings, hands that are ahead and get pretty good value want to just kind of start piling it in. Our better Jack X, that's going to dominate their Jack X and their 1-pair holdings. All of those hands want to be pretty aggressive here. And you see a lot of the nut flush draws and the queen through ace X suited or with backdoor flush draws. You see a lot of them betting somewhat aggressively here, which shouldn't be too surprising. But as I said, you're going to see a lot of give ups. Our non-backdoor flush draw hands are going to be pretty honest here. But if you have a backdoor flush draw or flush draw, with a few exceptions, you're going to be able to be pretty aggressive with it. And one of the reasons it likes the Queen X and King X isn't simply because it's going to dominate some of the flush draws that it calls, but or gets called by, but it's because it has additional outs to any Jack X holdings that the opponent may continue with, but it also has the property of not really having any showdown value. So it gets worse. It gets better to fold. It can get ace highs to fold, or maybe after a couple of street, it can start folding out pairs. It's not going to fold out really many pairs on the flop here, but it's setting itself up to fold out pairs, which it does not have right here on the flop. And its equity when called is nice because it has flush potential, which can get stacks in versus very strong hands like top pair, top kicker, or lower flushes or sets, or other soon to be made hands like 2 pairs and straights, etc. And so that's some pretty attractive quality. So it doesn't have showdown value, it loses to all the ace highs and shitty pairs, but it can get those ace highs to fold now or those shitty pairs to fold in later streets. And with respect to the hands that it does call, it does have chances of improving to win at showdown, outside of, just the cooler potential. So you have that faculty. And then another interesting thing is we see a lot of the ace 8 X offsuit and lower betting here. And for some of them, one of the reasons why you're going to see that is because you have both backdoor straight draws and backdoor flush draws. Like if you look at ace 6 with the spade, that makes it a little more of an attractive quality. You see all of the ace X of spades is betting in these lower combos. And as you can see, it does have the faculty of folding out some better ace X, like ace 8 off can fold out ace 10 off, and a little bit of ace 9 and ace 10 suited, which is pretty great for us. And it can also get called by worse hands. It gets called by king high and some suited connectors, and a lot of the hands that it gets called that are worse than it are going to have the value of having some sort of flush draw. So one of the things that makes it attractive about having spade in here in particular is that when you're getting called by worse hands, a lot of those worse hands are going to be flush draws. But if you're getting called by flush draws that are obviously worse than you, which is almost always going to be all of them, you're actually blocking their odds to improve. So you're making it less likely for the hands that call you that you beat to improve. And for the hands that beat you, like say Jack X or something without a spade or a lower spade, you still have that, 5% backdoor equity plus, pair equity a lot of the time. So that makes these really attractive versus, unless you have the nut flush yourself, which, they're not going to fold a flush draw on the flop. So you don't really have to be super conservative or sneaky about having that sort of holding. These are going to play a lot more honestly until you get to the other hands that start folding up better and also have like additional equity like gut shots or pairs or something like that. Because a lot of times bottom pair or a pair of threes isn't really going to be sufficient showdown value in spots where the ranges get kind of tight. So you're going to use that to block their value. So for example, is you could say that button doesn't have many sets here or sets of jacks here. And so if you have like king 3 or ace 3 or something, even though most of the hands that call down are going to be pairs between jack X and like 4s through 10s, having a 3 blocks like basically the best hand that they can have, which is pocket 3s. So one of the things you see in a lot of spots, especially out of position with the big blind, is 3x hands are going to double, triple barrel all in on particular runouts, given that they block like the top of range hands for the button. And that's kind of why you see the ace X with the ace of spades betting pretty much full frequency and all of these lower ace X offsuit combos. And it's for the same reason that we talked about, where we block some of the outs versus hands that we're already beating. But it's just like the, having ace 3 or king 3 sort of element where you're blocking like on a third of the time or whatever, you're gonna block the best possible hand that they can have. And so when you do that, it makes it really hard for them to call. And you even have the potential in some scenarios to get them to fold out some flushes. So having that sort of equity right there, even if it's not direct equity, but more so fold equity, that's really, really powerful. Going through the rest of the range, I don't know how much I want to get into some of these. It's a lot of the reasons for the offsuit combos are redundant to the same reasons for the ace X offsuit versus ace X suited hands. I don't really want to get into that. The value, I think the value portion of range is pretty obvious. If you weren't familiar, and a lot of these spots, whether it be like field versus field, let's say hijack versus cutoff 3-bet, or under the gun versus under the gun versus 1, a lot of calling ranges are going to be condensed to like a few suited broadways, but mostly like pocket pairs. So And those field spots, or in spots like, I don't know, button versus big blind and stuff like that, or small blind versus button, you're going to see a lot of the range that arrives to the flop or even gets to turns on a ton of different textures from the defender, which in this case is a button. It's going to be over condensed with just pocket pairs. So let's just look what they call with. Like I said, pocket pairs, no surprise here. And so that's kind of the assumption that the flop strategy is built upon, is that they're calling with pairs. If you're playing a game and you think they're going to call with all sorts of other hands, and you want to adjust your assumptions, although admittedly that's pretty hard to do in real time. But this is usually what the ranges are going to look like, and this is kind of what their compos are trying to optimize against. So I really only made this because I wanted to go over one or two exact combos of what happens on the turn. So say they call, they're going to call with pretty much all their pairs. A little bit of sevens and eights are going to fold out, but whatever. Pretty standard, nothing super surprising here. They call with their flush draws, their gut shots, their best ace highs, some of their king queen here, which is pretty indifferent, although I can't imagine with no backdoor it's positive equity. It's break even. So this is the range they arrive with, and this was the turn that I had in my game. And wet turns are a little bit tricky, as you want to find a way to optimize the same thing that we optimized pre-flop with the big blind 3-betting range. And you want to optimize equity when called, and your value wants to keep a wide range so that when they go all in on dry runouts, they can still dominate the range that they get it in with. So that might sound kind of confusing, but a lot of people will overbet for protection and stuff on these sorts of boards when you have like double flush draw with a million straight draws. And that's not really the right idea. Like you would rather keep, you would like if they got like Jack 9 here, and you overbet or you jam, and they're gonna fold their Jack 9, but they're gonna call their, ace 4 of spades or whatever. Then you'd rather not really do that, because if you've got ace Jack or something, a lot of the time, because you're gonna want to keep their Jack X in there. So if you have 6 of diamonds river and you jam the river, you're going to get called by their Jack 9 versus you're only a 2-to-1 favorite at best. For a lot of the stronger multi-draw high equity hands are going to continue when you go really big on the turns here. So basically, one of the most important things, as I'm going to keep saying on and on, is that our equity when called, and always thinking about what we fold out and what we get called by. Do we get called by worse? Do we fold out better? That's always going to be like the pinnacle of our decision making and the questions that we ask in hand. And when doing strategy construction, that's just always going to be a sort of pillar for us. Anyway, let's look at these two combos here. So we know that we want to keep in hands that we dominate, and we want to fold out hands that have us beat. So as I kind of predicted prior, we're going to see our ace jack with spades betting such that they can keep the Jack X in. And while the spades and the flush interaction cards are very important in some sense, they also kind of very easily cloud thinking and kind of go back and forth a lot in a lot of different spots. So it might not be worth it to like over focus on that. But it basically, a lot of the thinking here is just going to have to do with, dominating hand ranges. And so you see basically all of our Jack X goes all in, and that might be a little bit confusing because you could think like, okay, like, well, we have their worst Jack X is Jack 9, so like why would we go in with Jack 4 or whatever when any Jack X that's going to call us is better than ours? And the reason for that is because they call with hands that can't beat Jack X. As I mentioned before, we're gonna get called by, multi-draws or whatever, which is whatever. I mean, we're ahead of them, and that's like not a bad thing or anything, but that's not where we make the most money. We get far more money getting called by pocket eights or pocket nines with spade or something like that than we do getting called by, ace five of spades or clubs right here. So at a pretty high frequency, we're getting called by these second pair hands. And because they only have so few combos of Jack X to begin with, we're not super worried about getting called by hands that dominate us. If it were an ace-X sort of hand, where they're going to have, all of the suited aces almost, besides like ace-6 or whatever, as we saw pre-flop, you probably wouldn't see this as much. You wouldn't see, ace-7 with no equity or whatever jamming on double flush draw boards, no blockers as much, or just in a large variety of boards, simply because a large percentage of the calling range is going to be filtered around better ace-X calling. And the less wet the texture is, those weaker combos actually in particular are going to make that sort of bet even less and less, because the more polarized and larger your bet size is, the tighter the calling range is. And tight, and in terms of calling ranges, actually has is formally defined as having higher density of strong draws, instead of just your generic, old man coffee type preflop. Tight means getting called by like strong draws, to be a little more formal about that. So when you're getting called by a tight range, you're getting called by draws that don't really help you out as much compared to getting called by other things. So on drier textures, you're not going to see like the a7 on these ace-XX boards go all in as much, versus on, wet textures, who knows, it could be like a mixed strategy or something. But yeah, because there's so few combos, and because they call with like all the worst pairs, this is a set, but like all the worst under pairs, especially without a spade, nines for whatever reason likes calling with both. But again, let's not focus too much on the blocker effect and anti-blocker effect of the suit combos. But yeah, so that's why we see Jack X betting here. But the most interesting part, and the reason why I made the whole video, is because of what Ace King does. And in particular, what I had in this hand was Ace King of diamonds. And I was multi-tabling, and it's really hard to think about this stuff particularly well when you're multi-tabling. But one of the things that I did is I messed up, and I actually checked Ace King of diamonds right here. And I guess it's not wrong. Like the EV is probably going to be the same. I'm going to look it up. Yeah, it's actually the highest EV options here, so I didn't mess up. But I did have a theoretical misunderstanding of why this was happening. And I thought that it would be best to check, because they're going to have so many draws that continued, that I would be ahead of a lot of the range. Like if they're floating flop with, ace 10 through ace queen and stuff like that, or ace 5 even without like backdoor, or even without flush draws, then I figured I'm ahead a lot here, and I don't really need to bluff, and I can check call that. But that's actually not very ideal a way of thinking about it, because even though I was half right, yes, I am ahead of a good chunk of some of their range. We can kind of look at the breakdown right here and see where Ace King is. Oh, it's Ace King offsuit. Yeah, so here's Ace King of clubs. And I think that's Ace King of spades. So the non-flush draw ones are all going to be right around here, just below 50th percentile of our range here. And one of the things I didn't realize immediately was that sorry, I went to the wrong thing. Let's make sure I was right here. Yeah, so same sort of thing. We're checking was a higher EV, but my misunderstanding of the position But one of the things I was misunderstanding about this spot is the fact that we actually do dominate the range that calls us. When we go all in, we're getting called by other ace highs, but we have the best ace high. So when we go all in with ace king and we don't block the aces that call, we're going to get called by, ace four of spades here, ace five of spades, and hands like that. So that's actually extremely advantageous for us and is a really, really good way to realize our equity because we're going to fold out some pairs. Like we're 100% going to fold out some of the pairs when we go all in here. And we're going to get called by ace highs, and we beat all the ace highs and we lose to all the pairs. And that's like a pretty incredible thing that we get to do right there. And so let's look at this. We go all in for overbetting the pot, and look what happens. We get called by ace queen, we get called by ace five, we get called by ace four at 100% frequency when they have these combos. We get called by ace nine suited because if we're doing this with an eight, let's say, they're going to have pair outs to both the nine and often the ace as well. So we get called by ace queen, ace 10, ace 9, ace 5, and ace 4 for ace highs, and we fold out pocket 10s. Not a ton of them, but we do fold some out. We fold out pocket 9s. We fold out pocket 7s, 6s, 5s, 4s. I mean, it's just pretty incredible. And so we fold out tons and tons of pairs, relatively speaking, when you look at the range configuration here. And we get called by, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Basically, when you add them all up, 7 combos. We get called by about 7 combos of ace highs that we crush. And we fold out however many combos there are of these, which, they're not going to be full frequency because if you look at, if you filter this, they're not going to have as much as some of these hands in their range, and it's all going to be about percentage of range. What percentage of your range is ace four or all these ace highs? It's, getting the nitty gritty, it doesn't matter, but we pulled out an absolute fuck ton of pairs and we get called by a fuck ton of ace highs. And that is just absolutely incredible. And this is the kind of thinking we want to do in every street and every spot with every combo. And so when you look at pretty much everything here, it's gonna fall under that same sort of process that we've been going through over and over and over again now. The queen X is going to fold out pairs, and it's going to get called by Jack X. But we do have outs against Jack X, which makes it an ideal candidate. So we're going to fold out ace highs and king highs and pairs. And our equity when called, if you took queen 10 of spades or whatever, queen 10 of hearts, we're going to have great equity. We're going to have 9 plus 1, 2, 3, so 14 outs. Or if we get called by an 8, we're going to have 17 outs. So we're going to have 14 to 17 outs versus getting called by top pair or second pair. Like even if we get called by pocket 9s or whatever, we still have 17 outs with these hands. That's pretty ideal. And so we have 17 outs or only a 2-to-1 dog against the hands that beat us if we get called by. Yet we fold out ace high and king high and some lower pairs. I mean, we already saw all the ace highs folding out. A lot of the king highs folding out. A lot of the pairs are folding out, and we have we're only a 2-to-1 dog in some of these hands. And so you can just kind of do this over and over again. 5-4 suited is obvious. We have, a gajillion outs. We have 17 outs again. But we have 8 plus 9 or something. Yeah, 17. Or if we get called by the nut flush draw or something and 2 overs, that gives us even more outs. It gives us 17 plus 6. That's 23. I was thinking about how we could both have the nut flush draw and still count them as outs. But if we have, spades and we get called by clubs, we still have 23 outs there. And so we do this crazy beautiful thing where we're just constantly, every iteration, every node, every part of the range, every combo, we're looking to maximize equity when called while minimizing or maximizing fold equity, basically. And you could just go through every single combo and you can see that that's what they're doing. It doesn't matter if it's pre-flop with, Jack 4 suited, or Ace 5 off, or King 9 off, or 5 6 suited. Or you can do that on the river with, Queen 10 of clubs, or Ace King of diamonds, or King Jack off, or 5 4 suited. I mean, they're all looking at the same things. They're all trying to do the same things, but they accomplish them by different means. And that's kind of what I'm trying to teach you today. This spot is about much more than just this spot. But I learned something today, and that's why I was so excited to share it. I think the Ace King of diamonds and hearts thing is just so cool. Like, yeah, it's indifferent EV wise, but just having seen that and figured that out, and having that in my tool belt, and having more enhanced understanding of some of the more nuances of how this works and how the pulls and levers coordinate together, I just think that's so cool. I hadn't even looked at this yet, but when you look at the Ace King off, the only combos that are doing it are the ones without clubs or spades. And so if you had any second guesses about why we were doing that here, I hadn't even looked at this yet, but that was what I was expecting to see. And I was right. I mean, that's it kind of checks, our math checks out here. And it demonstrates to us, the why. It gives us a confirmation about why we're doing what we're doing. So I just want to share that with you. If you ended up making it through this and enjoyed it, thank you for watching, I guess. Have a good one.